Good evening. I hereby call this May the 8th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. As always, we'd like to start by recognizing our city manager, Lee Garrity, the city attorney's office, led by Ms. Angela Carmen, and Ms. Lori Sykes, our public safety attorney. I'd like to recognize Chief Mayo, who's our fire chief, Mr. Mel Sadler, who represents emergency management, and Chief Roundtree, who has announced that he will be retiring, I believe, effective September. And I will say, Chief, there'll be plenty of time to recognize you, but we thank you for your service to this community. We appreciate what you've done for our, and what you will continue to do for our city. Members of the committee, there are a few items on the consent agenda, and for those who are watching and who might be in the audience, items on the consent agenda are unanimously approved unless a council member wishes to be pulled for approval. We have two items on the consent agenda, item awarding a purchase order for a mobile command vehicle, and then there's an item discussing the proposed unified UDO for adding needle and hypodermic syringe exchanges programs in the city of Winston-Salem. Members of the committee, are there any items on the consent agenda that need to be pulled for consideration? If there are none, I'd entertain a motion at this time.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a properly second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposers likewise. That is unanimous. We'll move to item G1 of the general agenda.
Item G1, resolution awarding purchase order for mobile command vehicle and the sale of trade-in property. All
right, giving us a brief presentation, we have Mr. Jerry Bates, who's the purchasing director for the city of Winston-Salem. Is Mr. Bates available?
I think Chief Roundtree is going to give us a quick presentation.
We recognize Chief Roundtree.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Chairman Taylor and members of the Public Safety Committee. I'll be very brief, just to give you a very brief overview, and then I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Stone and Captain Weaver. They've been working on this project quite a bit. But what we're in the process of, what we would like to do, we have a 1995 mobile police station that we currently use. That vehicle is outdated. What we would like to do is purchase a new command vehicle that will be used for special events. It will be used for various different operations. Currently, our current mobile police station was purchased again in 1995 for $70,000. We have the opportunity to trade in that vehicle for $35,000 and purchase a new vehicle, which is actually a pre-owned vehicle at a cost of $200,000. So the cost to the city will be $165,000. Just to give you a little bit more information about that vehicle, I'm going to ask Lieutenant Stone to walk through some of the updated capabilities and technologies that the new vehicle will provide over our current mobile police station.
Lieutenant Stone, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. The proposed vehicle that we're considering now, this picture on the screen, is a little bit larger in length than our current MPS. It's 40 feet long. What it offers space-wise is considerable, considering it has a slide out that comes out the passenger side of the vehicle, because there's a lot more space inside the vehicle. This vehicle was developed in 2007 for Wake Medical after Katrina. They saw a need to have the communications type vehicle to help link the different communication capabilities that weren't present during that disaster. When this vehicle was contracted for Wake Medical by a company called LDV out of Wisconsin, it was a state-of-the-art vehicle back in 2007. No other vehicle like it in the country. Besides all the emergency equipment you see that it has on there, it was primarily a communications type vehicle. It afforded emergency responders to have uplink to satellite, which is mounted on the roof. It's kind of hard to see. What you're seeing there is a mast camera that extends much like the satellite trucks you see for the media. It gives us a pan, tilt, zoom camera that operates from inside. You can just rotate it around, kind of zoom in for site awareness. That is an external monitor. There's one on either side of the vehicle. So on a command type or critical incident type situation, it's hard to get everybody inside of the vehicle. It has canopies that roll out. You can see monitors on either side of the vehicle. So if you had critical information to relay or do briefings, you have a much more accessible venue outside. Again, just some of the contacts outside for phone links. Another monitor on the outside. That's the technical guts of the thing. Inside, you just see a tray of computer and technological equipment. It's all accessed from the outside, so when it has to be serviced, replaced, or upgraded, it's easily accessible. Generators, that's a newly installed generator on the vehicle, makes it independent. There's 4 AC HVAC systems on the roof. You just kind of go through some of the equipment inside. Some of it is slightly dated, but it's all usable. In the back is a command area, like a conference table, much like our current MPS, but it's also outfitted with a smart board. It has a galley or kitchen type area and a commode. That's looking toward the back of the command vehicle, toward the conference room that can be closed off, so you have the privacy of the command center back there. We would upfit this area. It has 6 workstations. That's where the slide out is contained. So when that opens up, you have a lot more workable space. We could use it for interviews on traffic fatalities for witnesses or on other critical incidents. Again, that's the opposite side of that work area. That's the front of the command vehicle above where the driver sits. This kind of shows the generator. That's the command seat, if you will, the passenger seat front. Again, it has such things as printers. The small blue box up on the top right there is a monitor for the camera. Equipped with a weather station. And again, the galley area. This is just a quick mock-up. This is not necessarily how it would be mocked up, but if it's a suggestion or just a little more user-friendly, that's the command vehicle with just some of our markings on it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. McIntosh.
Comment, not really a question. One thing I want to commend you on looking at a used solution. I think that makes a lot of sense. I bet this thing new was incredibly expensive.
They got a lot of donations, and a lot of people contributed to it for some of the selfish reasons, but they estimated the cost of well over $500,000.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like we're getting an awful lot for our money.
That's kind of what we looked at, especially we saw the retention of value we had with our current MPS, and it still has half its value. Yeah. And this is quite a bit less than that.
Then I want to commend whoever did the deal on getting fully 50% of the original cost of the vehicle that we bought in 1995.
Very fortunate to get that, yes, sir.
We need to keep that guy on staff.
I think that was Chief.
Okay, we need to keep him on staff.
That's what I would say.
Any other questions for Lieutenant Stone?
Can we get him to throw in all the decals and artwork in the project? Or are we going to have?
We had some slight upfitting for the inside and with the decals and doing the wrap on that. I think it was around 13,000, 13,500.
Yeah, looks great. It's going to be a big bump up.
Yes, sir.
It'll be a big bump up.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the presentation, Lieutenant Stone. I will say that we all agree that it is the job of this committee to provide the police, fire, and emergency management departments with what they need in order to serve this community. It has been mentioned briefly, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. This vehicle, the proposed vehicle, will help us with scheduled events. Here we have the National Black Theater Festival, the Dixie Classic Fair, Winston-Salem Cycling Classic, political rallies, etc. As far as crime scene management, the proposed vehicle would help us with motor vehicle fatalities, homicide, robbery scenes, hostage, and barricade scenes. And it goes towards the Joint Agency Unified Command, which means large fire or chemical spills, natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, snowstorms, etc., any other terrorist or mass casualty events. So we do have a need to take a look at this vehicle. Members of the committee, we've heard the presentation, we've heard from the chief with the introduction. What is the pleasure of the committee at this time?
I move for approval, Mr. Chairman.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. G1 is approved. Thank you. Before we move to item G2, I made a mistake at our last committee meeting. The head of our police union, was here to have some comments to us. And if we don't mind just sort of breaking procedure for a moment, I want to allow him just a couple of minutes to say what it is that he came to say at the last committee meeting, because I believe we will find it to be valuable. So at this particular time, before we move to item G2, we'll hear from Mr. David Rose, who's the head of our police union. Mr. Rose, you have the floor, sir. Well, you are in order because you just went after a police item, so we're right on time.
Well, thank you. I'll get through this quickly. I'm just going to read a statement. Chairman Taylor, members of the City Council, Mr. Garrity, I'm David Rose, president of the Winston-Salem Triad Police Benevolent Association, not the union.
Forgive me.
I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I want to first say that following the July 2016 ambush of police officers in Dallas, Texas, the Winston-Salem Police Department officers have experienced an unprecedented outpouring of support from the citizens of Winston-Salem. We continue to receive cards, emails, and other tokens of gratitude, and we truly know our service is appreciated, and for that we say thank you. On Monday, April the 10th, personnel with Springstead provided the Finance Committee and the Public Safety Committee with a summary of the one-third pay study that was conducted at the request of city personnel. The study encompassed the ranks of police officer, corporal, detective, and sergeant, which is a total of 502 sworn employees. It analyzed pay and benefit for North Carolina cities over 100,000 in population, but also added Asheville, Burlington, Greenville, and Durham County. The study concluded that 459 sworn WSPD employees already fall within the average pay range. A 2% increase was recommended for these employees to compensate for a compression issue created by raising starting salaries 6%. This proposal also reduced the top earning potential for each rank by an average of $17,735. We cannot determine how, other than raising starting pay, any aspect of Springstead's proposal improves the standing of WSPD's officers. If implemented, the WSPD will probably compete with the Kernersville Police Department in the Triad municipal market, but we will continue to lag far behind Greensboro and High Point in year-over-year comparisons. Additionally, it appears Winston-Salem Police Department police officers, corporals, and detectives will remain ranked 7th in average pay out of 9 North Carolina cities with a population over 100,000. I'd like to take a minute and describe the landscape as it pertains to recruiting and retaining sworn law enforcement officers at the Winston-Salem Police Department, and ask that you consider these issues as you develop a budget for the coming fiscal year. A recent ABC News report documents agencies such as New York, Seattle, and Chicago have seen a 90% reduction in the number of applicants for vacant positions. A December Winston-Salem Chronicle article documents that 32% of law enforcement training classes were canceled in North Carolina in 2016 because there weren't enough applicants to fill those classes. The same article talks about a 53% reduction in applications for vacant positions. In Chief Roundtree's February presentation to the Public Safety Committee, he advised that our current BLET class seated 19 cadets from 363 applications. Chief Roundtree advised that historically we would have received 1,000 to 1,500 applications for those positions. That's a 60 to 75% reduction in applications. We're currently operating with vacancies, and we can expect to lose 40 to 45 employees to retirement and voluntary attrition prior to the end of the 2017-18 fiscal year. We have 16 cadets in our current BLET class and another 15 in field training. If all of the cadets and officers in field training actually complete their training, we can expect a net loss of 15 more employees, leaving us with an estimated 65 vacancies. In January this year, we submitted a pay analysis and a proposal to each of you. The proposal addressed the fact that the agency has done extraordinarily well in regards to community-oriented policing, practicing procedural justice, training on de-escalation techniques, obtaining cutting-edge technology and equipment, and providing an employee-friendly work schedule. The analysis also documents that employees have seen a steady erosion of benefits, including discontinuing longevity pay, the loss of 1 of 2 defined benefit retirements, and paying among the highest costs for health insurance. The first 4 years of the decade saw little or no salary increases. We acknowledge that the Council has made efforts since 2013 to recognize the pay issue, but we still fall significantly short in pay when compared to the North Carolina, or to the Triad municipal market, and to agencies in the North Carolina market with over 100,000 in population. The proposal demonstrates that when compared year over year, the North Carolina market average of cities with 100,000 or more in population, current employees earn $900 less than the average with 1 year of experience. and as much as $12,836 at the 18-year mark. With the extraordinary tightening of applications for vacancies and the 8% attrition rate, we believe it would be wise to make a serious effort to implement significant changes if we want to position the WSPD as an employer of choice among prospective and current employees. As you have seen from the statistics above, we are not unique in that all agents are being forced to fill vacancies from an extremely retracted pool of applicants. Since January of this year, both Raleigh and Durham, who were already ahead of us in pay, approved midterm pay raises of 13.25% and 10% respectively, because they know they have to keep their personnel. We know the time to address the factors that are. We know that now is the time to address the factors that are causing us to lag behind. We believe our proposal was reasonable, in that it only positions us at the North Carolina market average. For a relatively small amount of money, our proposal would make us an employer of choice for military veterans transitioning to civilian life, and this incentive would retroactively incentivize current employees to remain with us. Finally, our proposal in regards to the take-home car program is the least expensive component, but the value it has in recruiting and retaining personnel is powerful, and it would make us competitive in the triad market. We urge council to seriously consider each component of the proposal as they were included, because your officer says these items were important to them. Thanks again for your time and for what each of you do for the citizens of this city.
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
Before you take your seat, I want to say that I've had the opportunity to meet with you and the team, and I've had the opportunity to review your proposal. I certainly believe, and I know that some of the members of this table would agree, that it deserves strong consideration in reference to how we review the budget, and we will be considering it. Again, our job is to make sure that police, fire, and emergency management have what they need in order to be successful. We've recognized the problem. I think over the last 3 to 4 years, we've made definitely great steps to correct that problem, and we will continue to look at how we can correct those problems in this budget cycle and in the ones to come. Are there any comments for Mr. Rose? Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, I agree with the chairman. And if you look back through the records, we've always said we don't put a price tag on the safety for our citizens. I commend our police for being police and for staying police with all the trying times we've had in this country and in this world when you look at public safety. Our city, I would say, can be considered unique when you look at our police department. We have not done or been involved in some of the kinds of things other cities have. I believe it's because we have a lot of people, your churches, your associations, your clubs, your neighborhood groups, working together to say that we want to continue to have a safe committee and to respect the police. I've said to the city manager on many occasions, we are lucky that we still have the number of police we still have. And we are lucky that police are still, people want to be police. And today I was in a place where there was a school, and they were down at the Kilpatrick Townsend Stockton because they've adopted Cook School. And one of the little girls, they asked, if you're not going to be your first choice as a coach, what's your next choice? And she said, I'd like to be a police. I felt so good when I heard that. And as I have said, we need to teach and encourage people. And he's heard it so many times, if the police stop me, you, or anyone, we need to keep our mouths closed. Let them have their way and find another way to solve a problem rather than trying as a citizen to solve it right out there in the streets. And so I'm pleased that our citizens have held on, most of them, continue to have faith. And I do believe that we are trying and we are working toward looking at the salaries and trying to bring our police to where they need to be. And thanks for your report.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll move to item G2, please.
Item G2, proposed unified development ordinance text amendments, adding needle and hypodermic syringe exchange program as a use. Item continued from the April 10th, 2017 Public Safety Committee.
Members of the council and committee, you've heard this item was continued from the last Public Safety Committee meeting. Before we begin a brief conversation about it, I'd like to pitch it to Mr. Attorney Contos to give us just a brief overview of sort of where we were, how we've gotten to this point, and then we can talk about how we move forward. Mr. Contos, you have the floor.
Certainly. At your March meeting, City Attorney's Office proposed what I will term version 1 of the needle and hypodermic syringe exchange program, which proposed to limit that use to 4 zoning districts: highway business, general business, campus, and general office zoning districts. At that March meeting, we were asked to come up with other means of regulating the use whereby it wouldn't be limited to just those 4 zoning districts. In 2 additional versions, version 2 I will call, proposed a special use district rezoning process by which the elected body, you, council, would receive an application, hold a public hearing, and rule upon it in a legislative fashion, meaning you could receive public input at any time, have a dialogue with citizens. The third version, version 3, would give the elected body, council, the option to consider applications through a special use permit process. Now that process would be quasi-judicial, and as such, what we in the legal world call ex parte communications, meaning speaking away and apart from the hearing, those types of communications with citizens would be prohibited. You would be limited to consideration of the matter strictly at the hearing itself, and only upon the 4 findings of fact you would be limited to that. At your last meeting, there were also a couple of questions for clarification regarding the fee schedule for those last 2 proposals, the special use district rezoning and the special use permit, elected body special use permit. I've attached, hopefully those are attached with your items, but generally speaking, it's a tiered fee schedule starting at, for both special use permits and special use district rezonings, they both start at $1,000 for properties of 2 acres or less, and then they tier upwards accordingly. Moreover, there was an inquiry as to different means to be able to address problems that might arise in the future, and those are outlined in your memo as well, whether it be trash, community and business development would assist with those concerns, breaches of the peace would be police department, and so those various items are also outlined in your memo. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Contos, Attorney Contos. I think we know that needle exchange programs are a fairly new concept overall, legally, that has been granted to us to consider from the General Assembly. I think those members from the community who have spoken, we've heard you, but I think we all agree that needle exchange programs are necessary. And I think what we sort of want to hear, we've got 3 people who are signed up to speak. We want to hear from you about your concept or your ideas about where these particular programs should be placed. I think we all agree that they're necessary. We have to have them. I think it's important. All right? So what I want to do before we hear from the community, signed up to speak, we have Ms. Nancy Gold, Ms. Kate McFarland, Mr. Barry Carlton. Before we do that, I'd like to turn it over to Attorney, well, sometimes you're so meticulous. I think you are attorney.
I don't get paid.
Councilmember John Larson, you have the floor.
I don't get paid like an attorney. No, yeah, long-winded. I think in quick summary, let's just put this in context for a minute. And to my council members, and thank you, Councilmember Adams, for joining us in this discussion. It is a discussion. It's intended to be a discussion of sorts. As we look at a function that a year ago had to be performed in the back alleys or wherever, it was not legal. And so now we have an opportunity to bring this function, which is very important, into a formal relationship within the city structure and how we conduct ourselves as an organized community. And that's really the root of the question. How do we embrace something that we think, the state legislature thinks, and a lot of people have thought for years, is a tool to be used to help address a pressing need dealing with an opioid epidemic that we're currently confronting. And so the merits of the program are irrefutable. The only question that resolves, there's a variety of problems that sort of came out of this piece of legislation. It was thrown into the overall ordinance that dealt with body cameras, and it was stuck toward the end. And it to me, it lacked a couple of things. One, it lacked any funding, of course. The state legislation never guarantees any money. And then second of all, it didn't provide any product or any assurances of how, logistically this thing would happen. It relied on the expertise, commitment of volunteers to come forward and activate something that is still very, very new. And lastly, it did not provide any clear definition as to how it would be placed in the landscape of a city. Where does this thing go? And because it is enabled and licensed by the state, it is in fact a very distinct and legal function. And as such, I felt that we needed to look at it as a function and consummate that in the zoning, in the ordinance going. The proposals that have been put forward, all of them have certain advantages and disadvantages. The idea, the initial one that had 4 very distinctive zoning categories that dealt with basically non-residential locations, highway business, general business, campuses, and general offices, provided a clarity of placement, entitlement, as it were, that this function could occur unquestionably in these locations by permit, by right, and there would be no public hearings or anything involved in it. Some discussion came up out of that that perhaps there would be some juxtaposition of a highway business to a school or to a park or something, and maybe just by right of being located in one zoning category was not clean enough to assure that adjacent activities of property owners or constituents, in fact, would be properly protected. So we came back with the proposal to look at opening it up, and that was to provide basically any location, any zoning category, but it would have to go through a very public process. And that would involve going through basically the planning board and eventually the city council. And they would be handled on a case-by-case basis. So in fact, you could have this function in any location that seemed to work, but it would receive the transparency of public review in the process. Nobody would be surprised about it. The problem with that, of course, came out to be that there's money involved in this, and there's a fee involved, and there's a process, and it takes time to work its way through city planning and get in front of the commission and what have you. And there was some concern about the cost factor of that proposal. The third proposal, which I'm not going to spend much time with, basically removed the city council from the constituents to allow them to engage before it came in front of city council. We would not be allowed, because it would be a quasi-judicial process, we would not be allowed to discuss that process or any facts dealing with that case prior to it actually being presented in the public forum. And I thought that was eliminating the kinds of discussions and transparency and openness that I originally had suggested would allow this to most easily be added to our neighborhoods or our city. So here we are today. I've asked planning staff also recently to look into some other options. I'm not sure whether we're prepared to go forward with that. I do not have a strong timetable on this. We have one facility that is operating currently. It happens to be in my ward. I know that they have made efforts to embrace the community around them. I know that they have worked on a shoestring budget. I know that that originally there were some rough spots for them going in, and a lot of that is being worked out, I'm sure, while we're speaking. However, my concern long-term is that in the years ahead and in the other neighborhoods and through the city as a whole, where do we want to place that? And this is the question I'm asking of my colleagues on the council. I'm asking of the citizens. What kind of placement are we most comfortable with? And so the proposals that are before us, and I think there's some citizens who want to speak today, is still a moving target. And I would like to have some more consultation, I think, with the planning staff directly on the idea of a special use limited zoning category, which might in fact allow certain things to happen maybe without the expenses and site plans and other things that may have to be generated under what I proposed last time, which was a special use district zoning, which in fact I think requires not only some expense but potential site plans and other things which I think preclude realistically that being implemented cleanly and efficiently. So this is where I'm working on it. I think council's still working on it, trying to figure out how to best and simply embrace this process. But I'm anxious still to hear from the citizens their concerns. I'm anxious to hear solutions and proposals from both practitioners and neighborhoods. And I'm anxious to try to craft then a document that will stand up with reasonable assurance that it will apply equally to other wards throughout the city and will be not require major modifications through time is where we are. So, the Chairman, that's where we are, and I think what I'm basically saying is let's hear from the public today, and I'd like to hold it in committee.
Thank you, Councilman Larson. And I think those who are here can see why I made a mistake and called him Attorney Larson. He always does a good job of articulating himself, and we appreciate the value that you bring to this conversation. Members of the community, again, we agree this is necessary. We want your opinion as to where and how these particular needle exchange facilities can and should be placed. Signed up first on the agenda, and we want to give you all 2 to 3 minutes to speak. We have Ms. Nancy Gould, or is it Gold? Oh, Ms. Gold, how are you? We hadn't seen you in a while. Wow. Okay. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Nancy Gold, and I live at 1031 Van Hoy Avenue, Winston-Salem, 27104, and the name is spelled G-O-U-L-D. I do not live in the neighborhood, but I do have long-term connections with the neighborhood. My very first husband and I, when I graduated from college, bought our first home for $15,000. My first job paid like $8,000 a year. So it was just a great historic neighborhood, and I've always loved the area for over 40 years. My current husband and I own rental property in the area with the goal of fixing up historic homes and then later selling them to homeowners. We currently own 3 properties within less than a block of Green Street Church. I am also a member of Green Street Church. And the reason that you have not heard from me before is because I've tried to keep an open mind and to learn as much as I can about the subject. I've been lucky enough to have conversations with Mr. Miller at least a couple of times, and with Reverend Carpenter. They even were kind enough to take almost 2.5 hours to explain lots of things to me just a few days ago. So as your typical planner style, I've gotten on the internet to try to teach myself as much as I can. And, of course, I've read a lot from the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition website. I've looked at what other cities are doing. And as I mentioned, I have talked with Mr. Miller and Kelly Carpenter on several occasions. What I've learned is that there are other cities, a few, struggling with the same problem that we're having. I think I came across a community called Lafayette, Indiana. Exact same problem. They have a small church in a smaller neighborhood that wants to have the exchange program. The program there has had problems trying to find a more central non-residential location. I've contacted news reporters there over the past couple of months, and they are right where we are. They are at a standstill. Don't know what's going to happen there, but it is a topic that's across the nation. Other things I learned is that I looked at the exchanges in Raleigh, Asheville, Greensboro, Durham, Charlotte, and all of those that I found that were listed on the harm reduction site are located in office or commercial buildings that are zoned office or commercial and are not in the middle of neighborhoods. They are also on major roadways, and they have plenty of parking. I think the most important thing here, though, that I'm trying to do is to focus on what we all agree upon. And hopefully the things I think we agree upon, Mr. Miller will agree too. As you've stated, this program is saving people's lives. It's already done that. Its purpose, one of its major purposes, is to try to get people into rehab programs. It's definitely successful at doing that. So I am definitely not opposed to the program. Also, I think that we can agree upon that this epidemic, the opioid epidemic, I mean, it's just bigger than any of us can imagine, and that it is a major public health problem. It's one that I think is not going to be solved by one exchange in one neighborhood. In summary, I personally want to see the exchange program remain at Green Street Church, but I would also like to see our city and county commit to finding a more central location for a major citywide exchange program, and or to also work with our health department to create exchange programs in our health clinics as Orange County has done here in North Carolina. I think if you look into it, you will find out that it is not an overly expensive thing to do. I have already had conversations with Mr. Harlan Hunter, the director of our public health department. He is very interested in working on partnerships to try to provide more exchange programs within our county. He is going to continue conversations with people throughout the community. I think he's planning on getting together with people such as me and Mr. Miller that are interested in another couple of months. In the meantime, I hope to encourage you guys and Dudley Watts and the county commissioners to work together to address this program more comprehensively than just one exchange program. I think that's, pretty much the main points I have to say. If I've said something wrong, I'm sure Mr. Miller will let you know.
Thank you for your comments, Mrs. Gold.
But thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Next is Ms. Kate McFarland.
I hate public speaking, so pardon me while I shake here a little bit.
It's okay.
This is important enough to me that I really felt the need to come and speak on this topic.
Could we have your address?
Yeah,
and name?
My apologies. Please give your name and address for the record.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Kate McFarland. I live at 631 South Green Street, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27101.
Thank you.
Prior to moving to that address, I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. I lived there until I was 29 before I moved here to Winston-Salem. We've been here for about 10 years now. When I lived in Austin, I was the membership coordinator for one of the largest student housing organizations, Cooperative Housing, and it was a nonprofit business. I sat on the board. I was extremely involved in this organization. So community building is incredibly important to me. Housing is incredibly important to me. So I don't say these things lightly. I currently am on the board of our neighborhood organization. and until recently I was the secretary of the neighborhood organization. So with that said, I live directly adjacent to Green Street Church. I share a property line side by, and so to be perfectly honest, of anybody that lives in the neighborhood, I'm probably the most deeply impacted by traffic at the church and by potential negative impacts of any program that the church offers. Given the sensitive nature of needle exchange operations and what they exist to provide, I think it's really, really important that the organizations that operate these exchanges would be in conversation with neighbors, and that the neighbors can trust those organizations. And I do not at this point trust this organization. I don't feel safe with this organization operating next to me. I feel like it's extremely important that if we are going to allow needle exchanges to operate when they're literally within feet of a person's house, that they need to be held responsible, and they have to be forced, if necessary, into a relationship with the community. With some forcing, Twin City Harm Reduction Initiative has sort of begun to participate in neighborhood discussions, but as of yet, I can't really say that that is, that I trust that that would continue. Initially, when the exchange began operating, they expressed a desire to work with the neighborhood organization, and then it basically never happened. So it's you know, a declaration of intent is great, but what I really want to see is follow through. And I think that any neighborhood that would take on this sort of operation deserves to have an organization that will communicate with the neighbors and that the neighbors can trust. So as of this point, I feel like the organization, the needle exchanges, should not be allowed to operate ever within a residential community. However, if we are going to allow that, there needs to be some process by which they are forced into a relationship with neighbors.
Ms. McFarland, thank you for your comments and for having the courage to speak, and we appreciate your input to the conversation. Thank you. The last person that's been signed up is Barry Colton. If you would give your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, sir. I'm Barry Carlton. I'm the husband of Nancy Gold, and I thought she expressed our feelings very clearly about it. I can't add much, but I love West Salem. I've been active there also for probably 20 years. I've spent 12 years there, living there, and I still go back and forth. I work there about every day on our properties. My whole goal in life is to improve West Salem. I'm also a community builder. I was a social worker. In college, I used to be a substance abuse counselor at Charter Hospital. I was also a law enforcement officer for the city of Winston-Salem for 5 years. I worked since the 1970s to improve West Salem and Winston-Salem in any way I can. And I'm not the only one that's worked hard there. Barry Lyons is here. There's many, many people all through these years that we've went out. We've actively confronted drug addicts on the street. We sit out there like 30 hours at a time to keep them, from just doing it without somebody watching them. We've still got a drug problem there right across from the church. There's a little fourplex there on the corner. It used to be a store. And there's been several drug salesmen that come in and out of that place. I manage the property next door, fourplex across the street there. And we have to get them arrested and get them out of there. And I've got people who want to rent my apartments who go to this NA meeting there at the church, and they say that we got people there come to the church trying to sell to them all the time. So to me, it's risky to have this in a residential neighborhood. You've got the drug sellers there right across the street, and you've got people that's admitting that they're coming into the NA meetings also. There's a lot of pressure on West Salem as it is with all these social programs. And I've been doing some research also, and at least the
the examples I found with other cities, like my wife said, everybody's struggling with this, all cities are struggling with this, but a lot of them take pride in not having this in a residential district. The police become very involved, and they'll find somewhere, like an office district or a business district or whatever, to have these things. And like I say, I used to be a substance abuse counselor. My dad was an alcoholic. I know all about addiction. I know that drugs addicts can relapse. Wants to stop Mr. Miller from relapsing and to start selling there with no oversight. I appreciate y'all coming in and exploring what to do, because it's just ridiculous to have this come in with the residential neighborhood when all the other towns are trying to deal with it, and you guys do nothing. So I really appreciate y'all being here and taking a responsible attitude about it. And so far as I know, if you're going to have it in a residential section, it needs to be regulated, or it needs to have some type of oversight by the city. And it doesn't need to be all in West Salem. I mean, like I say, we're struggling now. We're overburdened with problems now. Why can't it be in Vista or North, somewhere like that? The reason it is because we don't have much power there. We always struggled with the attitude that it's an undesirable neighborhood, so it gets stuck in there and nobody cares. But I'm glad you do, and you're willing to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Members of the council and committee, those are all of the citizens who have signed up to speak. What we'll do, out of the interest of time, if it's okay, if we can just kind of keep our comments to maybe 60 seconds, 120 seconds, because we've heard pretty much the crux of what the issue is, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So please, if we come as quickly as possible, whoever wants to start, Mr. Porter, Mr. Lyons, give your name and address for the record, please, and keep your comments as brief as possible.
All right. My name is Colin Miller. I live at 1039 Montgomery Street, soon to live at 906 West Street, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27101. I guess I just wanted to speak really quick to the zoning suggestions and the suggestions that have been voiced. We are willing, and I think we've shown that we're willing to work with and in the community. I've been to, I never used to go to the neighborhood association meetings. Me or my fiance has been to 3 of the last 5. We've presented data at one of those meetings and had it at the ready at another one, for people to ask. We've always put our number out there and our any sort of contact, and ask the neighborhood, to contact us with any issues, or if they just wanted to talk or bring up concerns or whatever. And we've also just had a presentation that I believe we invited the council to as well, to present data and also have people ask questions, voice concerns, anything that they wanted to. So I just wanted to put that out there first. But I'm wondering why we couldn't look for some sort of solution, and I'd be willing to work on such a solution that would not sort of put the burden of proof onto organizations that are trying to save lives and have roundly been shown that they are very successful and have little to no impact on the community. I won't even say little, because I haven't found a research study that says that syringe exchanges have impact on the surrounding community. So I guess I'm just wondering why we wouldn't do something like, first of all, we're operating in a church that has oversight over our organization. And to my knowledge, we haven't had any complaints about operations thus far. But, we are more than willing to react in any way to, that is needed, and work with the community as we have for years and years and years at Green Street, were there any issues to arise. Also, this isn't, I think I've said this before, but this is a starting point for this organization. And it wasn't like we decided to just place it in a neighborhood. It's a volunteer-run organization. We don't have any money. I live in the neighborhood. I've been a member at Green Street. I used to run the after-school program there. It seemed like a natural fit. So I guess I just wanted to kind of put it out there that I think that there's probably other solutions that might work just as well, as far as having some oversight without restricting zoning on syringe exchange, and without imposing, potential judicial measures or legal measures that where they'd have to sort of prove their worth. I think that the verdict is already in on that. So I just want to kind of throw that out there and put forward a suggestion that maybe we look to having some sort of mechanism to better connect with the community, better interact with the community. And if anyone has any suggestions, we've been all ears the whole time, and I guess I don't know how else to interact with the community. Clearly Facebook wasn't working too well, so we've tried to put ourselves out there and have personal conversations, but I'll stop there because I know time is short. So.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Ms. Porter, Mr. Lyons, and then we'll stop there. If we can keep it at 1 or 2 minutes, please.
Sure.
Give us your name and address for the record.
Yes, Kim Porter. I've lived at 1212 West 1st Street and on West 4th Street, and I've lived on West 1st Street in the last 6 months. Just real quickly, it's not unusual for churches to provide health care and services for their communities. We have health care clinics all across the city. This is a health issue with the needle exchange program. And I think the gentleman earlier said it, that there is a place right across the street from the church where people are actively using drugs. So it would make sense to have a needle exchange program there. Where do people use drugs? Where are they using drugs? They're using them in neighborhoods. That's the reality we have to face. We are fearful of that, some of us, but we need to face it. We need to face the challenge. I think it's great if the health community here will have an exchange program, maybe at the health department, but we need several exchange programs. And this is one that has, to my knowledge, done really well. They've been successful across the nation. I know here it's a new thing, but what I'm saying is we've got to deal with this problem. I'm glad that you all are taking this on, and it saves lives. It also saves people from getting diseases, and this helps impact people in the community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll give your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Barry Lyons, 948 West Academy Street, Winston-Salem. Thank you for letting me speak. I didn't get here in time to sign up. I live in West Salem, and I found out about the needle exchange in a way that I don't care for. I found out about it on a Facebook post. My concern, and of course, I didn't know much about it, so I chose to do some quick research. I did some reading, and there's no doubt in anybody's mind that this is an essential service. It's something that needs to happen. We have a crisis. However, what concerns me, there are two things that concern me. One is that particular, I'm not sure that it belongs hidden in a residential neighborhood like it is, and also that location is already a bit intense. I would like to encourage you to at least put in place some type of public process for two reasons. The first, obviously, as a neighbor, so that neighbors have a chance to know what's going on and don't find out about it by surprise like many of us did, but also for the success of the organization. As someone who's been a neighborhood activist and served on a planning board, this is entirely empirical, but to my observation, we have in place mechanisms for anything that's going to change possibly the tenor of an area. And if a developer wants to do a particular type of rezoning, then the people around it have to be notified, because we want people to understand that there may be a change in the way that the feel or the existence of the neighborhood. I think something like this also has that potential. I think a public process would also allow the organization to get public buy-in. It's been my observation that when there is a public process and the public is allowed to participate and they buy in, it's more successful. And the very example I would give you in West Salem is the Hunter Hill development. That was potentially a little touchy when it first came in. They came to us, they did some presentations, they worked with us. Not only did we support it, the neighborhood came together and actually helped the initial residents furnish. So my concern and my wish is that you would at least establish some form of public process for this particular entity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. I initially sort of deferred to Councilmember Larson when we started the conversation, because this is in the South Ward, but it is a city issue, but this one is particularly in the South Ward. I don't live in West Salem or in the West End, never have, but sort of my input into the conversation is, but I have run a drug treatment program for the state and for the county. So what I've noticed running the drug treatment program, and even in the conversation that I'm hearing here today, is that programs like these are necessary. Again, this is the one thing we all agree on, but there's this concept in your textbooks in the justice system called NIMBY, not in my backyard. There's a lot of people who believe they want the programs, but nobody wants these in their backyard. So we have a very sensitive juggling act to do this evening to try to figure out what is the wisest and best thing to do to provide this service to the community, but to be sensitive to the neighbors who live in this community and in other communities to come. Before we defer to the community to hear their comments, we had a couple of comments from the council members who wish to be heard. I'll recognize Councilmember McIntosh at this time.
Thank you. Once again, I'm frustrated by the fact that we're trying to use a tool that isn't really suited for the job that we're trying to do. We're talking about zoning, which is the use of a property, but where we really run into problems is the behavior that's associated with the use of the property. There is a methadone treatment center in town that is in a highly commercial zoning, and they're a problem. And they're a problem because of the way they're managed, not because of what they're doing. It's their management. I feel like we're kind of back at the early days of the AIDS crisis. It freaked everybody out. Everybody was scared. Nobody wanted them near them. I lived in the Holly Avenue neighborhood at the time, small neighborhood. We had 6 group homes in the neighborhood. We welcomed AIDS care service into our neighborhood with open arms. They were great neighbors. They were wonderful. Never had a problem with them. But of the 6, we had one. It was a real problem, and it was a problem because it was badly managed, and there was no legal way to get them out. So, here we're talking about a zoning usage idea, but it doesn't really come down to that in my mind. None of the 3 options that we have in front of us, zoning is forever. When you rezone a piece of property, it's there. And so you're saying that the use of that can go on forever, even if the behavior is bad. I mean, you can chip away at it and you can use law enforcement to deal with it, but when it's a problem, it's a real problem, and it really affects and impacts everybody around it. I have questions about licensing and what tools does the city have to stop the usage, to contain the usage of a program that is not abiding by, call it neighborhood standards. Is the needle exchange licensed to any degree, that kind of thing? And are group homes licensed? What process do you have to go through to get a group home? I've got a group home in a neighborhood that I live in now, and they're completely not a problem. Everybody, and they're just there. So really, the zoning doesn't make a difference. It's how the program is run. And so, how do we affect that? And I'm still not. I don't think that we're addressing the real issue by changing the zoning or requiring a particular zoning. I think what it will guarantee success for any program is trust, and that's the neighborhood trusting what the program is about and how they manage their clients. And I can tell you the methadone program doesn't have that trust. The program that we had a problem with in the Holly Avenue neighborhood did not have that trust. So to me, those are the things that trouble me about just saying you can be anywhere. And let's face it, nobody, if you have a commercial building, you're going to be fearful of this usage as well. So I don't think there's anywhere in town that you can say is going to be open arms accepting of needle exchange programs. So we're going to have these same issues, whether they're commercial owners next to you or residential owners next to you. So to me, it gets down to behavior and how we police that.
So, council people, we informed the community at the last meeting that we would try to consider this item for up or down vote. I know sometimes things are far more complex than what we initially believe or think them to be. So sort of be considering what we want to do. Are there any comments about the direction we want to go or any motions that we want to put on the table at this time? Before we get there, I'd like to recognize Councilwoman Adams.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. The times we live in. I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s. I remember when, the drug addiction that we're seeing now, we saw it then just like we're seeing it now. Nobody understood it. Nobody knew how to deal with it. And there were needle exchanges in the bigger cities all over the place. I went to college in Baltimore in 72 to 76, and heroin was king. So there were needle exchanges all over the urban core of Baltimore inner city. The neighborhoods basically just, because of the conditions after the riots and everything, They just kind of lived with it because it was part of the neighborhood, as well as the people were part of the neighborhood. These are people's kids, grown-ups and others, people that were successful at one time, but now they were addicted. So my spin on that for Winston-Salem is, these are not the best of times and they're not the worst of times for us. We've always figured out how to go forward and work together. But there's one thing that we know it's needed, but we also know that we often tout to our citizens to be engaged in your neighborhood. Take ownership. That's why we believe in neighborhood associations and people organizing to protect their neighborhoods, their property, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not going to say that those folks, just like me or others, we don't care about what's going on and the needs of others. It's just like, as Chair Taylor said, people think that it's their neighborhood and it's residential. They want it like that. They want old folk like me to be able to walk around and not feel a little intimidated or frightened. They want children to be safe and not, approached. They want what they want. So, I'm one of these people, like I said, I've mentioned this to others. I don't want it to seem like, and people will say that that's what we're trying to do, is discriminate against those who are the most vulnerable. But I would say I looked into the deal of other cities, and I know we heard earlier from some citizens they don't think we should be benchmarking and looking at other cities, but that's the way we do business. That's what we're elected to do. So I would say for me, I would be looking to others as benchmarks as to where these facilities should go. I don't necessarily believe that we got to put a hard fix of a zoning requirement in neighborhoods, but I think we need to look at those cities and see where most of these facilities are located. I don't have a problem with them being in commercial areas. I don't have a problem with the county and public health stepping up to what they're considered to be responsible for when it comes to these types of issues. I don't have a problem with putting them in major transit centers or areas where people can get to and get back to their neighborhoods. But call me what you like, I'm a proponent of protecting the neighborhoods and allowing them to have those rights. That's just where I'm coming from.
Members of the, Mr. Larson.
Yeah, let me.
It's only fitting.
First of all, sub note. If I am an attorney, I guess I should clarify one matter, and that is under the proposals as they currently stand. And again, we're talking about a citywide ordinances. We're talking about that legal function to perform, within the ordinance system. But because we have one clinic already underway and operational, the way it's written right now is that clinic is grandfathered in until 2019 under the way it's written right now, with the clear focus to allow, regardless of what the zoning is, whether we go with designated 4 categories, 5 categories, or whether we go with special use, to allow time for that operation to conduct themselves within the neighborhood in a way that's satisfactory to that neighborhood, or to allow them to relocate, or what have you. So that provision is in it right now, and it's not a justification of anything other than trying to understand how to move forward on this particular topic in the place where we are right now as a city. So I wanted that to be clear tonight as we went on. As these discussions unfold, as we want to look at other zoning categories, if we want to look at time periods, if we want to look at some of these questions, I think the biggest question that we keep hearing is, how do you regulate, how do you quality control a function if you're not doing under the zoning, and it's a limited world. But if you want to quality control something, what are the tools available? And I guess we've asked the attorney to look at that once before, but you've got to ask, are we able to go to the state and protest at the state and have them pull the license? These are questions I still haven't found a comfort factor, and I think the neighborhood concerns that we heard today, whether residential, what have you, are still part of that question of how these operations are conducted. The only tool I recognized, Councilman McIntosh, was zoning, because it provides a specific place for a function to occur, and everybody knows that. Doesn't say the function's going to go well, doesn't say it's going to be managed good, doesn't say it's going to be profitable, doesn't say anything. Everybody knows it's going to go in that zoning category. That's what the first proposal did. I want to be very clear about that. It has limitations. It has problems. And if you can help me solve these problems, I'm happy to hear that. And that's what these discussions
Well, that's not to belabor the hour. I think we have a great understanding of where we need to go, but a decision must be made. And I guess the question for me is, do we make that decision today, or do we hold for more information to help us to be better informed to make that decision? Mr. Larson, excuse me. I want to go to Mayor Pro Tem Burke, and I'll come back to Councilman McIntosh, then I'll come back to you, Mr. Larson. Mayor Pro Tem Burke.
Yes, thank you. We're going to have to come to some final decision soon. But sitting here at this meeting, we've had other concerns. Now, we can say what we want to say, but you do have to have control over certain things. And believe it or not, something like this will be saturated in sometimes your poor neighborhood. And I would like for us to be fair. And I like the way that Mr. Larson is moving. And then the question came up, are they doing in other cities? One of the people asked. I think we need to get the whole picture. Tonight, I don't believe I will be ready to vote tonight.
Okay. All right. Mr. McIntosh.
Mr. Larson and I have spoken a lot about this. I mean, we spent a lot of time, and both are very passionate about it, and see eye to eye on some things, and don't on some others. And I've got a long history in West Salem. I've done a lot of restoration work in the neighborhood and know the neighborhood really well. You know, a couple things that we talked about that I think can be fleshed out over time is that, can these be limited to church settings, or exist, if they're going to be in a residential neighborhood, only in sort of an institutional type setting? I don't think anybody here would be in favor, I'm not in favor of seeing these pop up in a single family residential house in a residential neighborhood. Sort of only in a quasi institutional setting does it make sense to me. Because I guess as it is right now, you could just pop one of these up, and I think the limitations there make sense to think about. Also, if we set sort of 2019 as that date certain where they're going to be in or out, it seems to me like we could come back and visit this in 1 year and see what the conversation has been with the neighborhood and the needle exchange. That makes sense for this one setting, though. But from a global standpoint, what we want to do for the city, that doesn't. So I'm torn. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on here.
Well, I don't have to read the writing on the wall to determine that it sounds like the general consensus is to hold this item in committee. I recognize Councilman Larson for a final time, and I saw your two hands. I do apologize. The public hearing has closed, so I promise I want to hear everybody who wants to speak, but we'll do this all night, and we've got to move forward. So the consensus of the committee is to move forward. We'll be available after the meeting to speak to you. It's not that we don't want to hear you. It just won't be right now, sir. I apologize.
I think at this point we would do wise to collect some data on other cities. I think we'd do wise to look at the limited component of special use limited and see what the financial ramifications for practitioners would be under that zoning category, and any other suggestions on enforcement as far as the ability to extricate these functions out of an area if, in fact, they prove problematic, and what options we would have. And I think we might have some by going to the state human services or health departments and having the license revoked. But I don't know that for sure, and I need some reassurances in all those categories. So, Mr. Chairman, I recommend we hold it in committee.
Attorney Carmen's recognized.
I was going to say there are some annual reporting requirements to the Department of Health and Human Services, and we can certainly get some more information in terms of if they don't meet those reporting requirements or if there are other issues, what exactly would the Department of Health and Human Services do?
And who could file that? Would the city be the petitioner on that, or would it be neighborhoods, or how's that done? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, I've heard a couple of options about holding this in committee. I've heard evaluating this after a year. So I want to be clear as to sort of the direction of the committee and the council. Do we want to hold this until June and take another look at it, or do we want to sort of give staff an appropriate level of time to get back with us information? The pleasure of the committee. Thoughts?
My feeling is I want to keep the conversation going. I think we could bring it back in June and hopefully have what we need to make a decision by then.
Yeah, I agree, because if we're not careful, we'll go on and we still will not have.
No, we need to bring it to closure, but we can do a little more due diligence.
And if
All right.
you have additional questions, just call me or Jerry. Let us know.
So I'll make the decision to bring this back to the committee in June. That concludes the general and consent agendas. Is there any other business that should be considered for the good of the order? Seeing nothing further, I consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.